This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies Singapore. I'm your host, Ong So Chin. Today's episode is called Tech and the Token Female. Everyone's talking about women these days, not least the Singapore government. In September 2020, Minister K. Shanmugam announced that it was time for a deep review of society's attitudes towards women, not only in areas of domestic and sexual violence, but also inequities at work and life in general. This review will culminate in a white paper to be tabled in Parliament this year. One particular area that has generated some discussion is women in tech industries, simply because there aren't that many. At the Singapore Tech Forum in November 2020, Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam said, more needs to be done to encourage women to take up tech jobs. He added, we've got to have a very conscious effort to develop that norm, and that's a responsibility of the government, of education institutions, of corporates, and of community. This particular emphasis on women is not limited to just the tech industry. There appears now to be a greater sensitivity to gender balance among employers in other sectors too, and a greater appetite to even the keel by ensuring that women are adequately represented in hiring and other policies. But not everyone is comfortable with this purposeful shift, including some women who bristle at the idea that they might need special attention or help. So, at what point does conscious effort become tokenism? Should we push women to the forefront without drawing too much attention to it? Does the conscious act of promoting women discredit their abilities? Or are we just overthinking things? With me to discuss these issues are Winthia Goh, who heads NCS Next Digital, the digital innovation and services arm of NCS, Singapore's information communications and technology service provider, and Anna Gong, CEO and founder of Perks Technologies, a customer engagement and loyalty software company solving consumer behavioral challenges in the mobile-first and instant gratification economy. Thank you both for being on the show today.
Hi, hello.
Hi, and welcome to a brand new year.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So what have you guys been doing over the new year, Anna?
Oh my goodness. Try to sleep more and exercise more, but ended up eating and drinking. What else do we have to do in Singapore?
Right. And Winthia, how was your new year?
Spend time with the family, looking forward to just after Christmas, the opening of phase 3, so more people can gather. That was good.
Right. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, and I was pathetic over the New Year. I actually left the New Year's Eve party at 11:30 p.m. because I was tired. Got home, showered, and texted everybody Happy New Year before I crashed out in bed. So that was the start of my New Year. But anyway, New Year 2021, what do you guys think? Is it a good time to be a woman?
It's always a good time.
Yeah.
The minute you were born,
when has it
great.
ever been a bad time to be a woman?
Right. So what's good about being a woman in 2021?
Opportunities are just so abundant. On my way here, by the way, I read this Harvard Business Review article about how female leaders are more resilient and better at managing crisis. And
Right.
it just so happens that I was walking into this podcast.
Fantastic.
Yes. It feels like we're equipped already. We're so used to managing and juggling and multitasking, managing work, life balance, whatever it is. So bring us another crisis. It's fine. We can juggle, we can manage. And I think for us, it's just take a deep breath. And then it's another task.
Right. Another year, another task. Right.
Yeah.
So I just want to actually dive deeper into Senior Minister Tharman's call to get more women into tech, right? Seeing that's not really a crisis, but that's something obviously that needs to be addressed. Now, he says that in school, there's pretty much an equal male-female ratio in the science and tech streams. However, the number of women in tech peters out when we get to the tertiary level and eventually into the job marketplace. Why do you think that is, Winthia?
Well, I think one possibility is the lack of role models, to have enough women that they know about in positions and in careers that they can look up to. And I do mean that they know about, and not necessarily that there are not enough women in some of these roles or some of these industries.
Okay. Anna, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think There's a lot of factors that are at play: society, corporate mandates. There's so many things even in our family ecosystem that prevents or maybe even changes the mindset. When you have aspirations, regardless of gender, but because you are female, you're more or less steered towards a different direction.
Right.
So that's one of the primary factors, I would say.
Right. We mentioned role models. And Anna, I know your entire experience has been in tech, and you came from the Bay Area in the US, right? And you had experience there in terms of lack of role models as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so when people ask me about role models, I only had male role models growing up, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, it would have been nicer to see some females succeed right in front of your eyes and set an example. What happened growing up as an immigrant in the U.S. also kind of shaped who I was or who I am now. And we literally managed through discrimination, bullying, and all the different types of our journey as immigrants in the U.S. And as a minority as well, and female in tech, it's actually double minority. And so that's in itself a little challenging. But my parents never raised me to be a female. Actually, they always say in Chinese, I'm a tomboy. And I didn't care, and I always just persevere and just race through and just try to achieve what I could. I never had a curfew. I never was treated like a female. And so that shocked a lot of people. As long as you're treated with responsibility and freedom, it's up to you to handle that.
Right.
And so I was brought up differently already.
Yeah, so you grew up in an environment where child rearing was gender blind. So your parents didn't look at you as a girl or a boy.
Correct.
Right, and taught you basic skills on survival and getting ahead and
Yeah,
being
when
independent, right?
when my sister was staying home, my dad said, "Can you take her out? She needs to be out." Why is she home all the time?
Right, Winthia, what do you think about that? Was your career pretty much gender blind as well, or not?
Well, so I've been in digital all my life. I think the first part of that, I do think that it was generally quite gender blind, and digital has been such a growing field where most organizations struggle to find enough people. I don't think they had the luxury to try to discriminate when they are in such a need of more and more people to work in this field. So definitely in the first half, I really I didn't realize I was a woman. That doesn't come out at all. That is not a consideration. It's really more about your competence, your experience, the skills, and the attitude you bring to a field that is changing so rapidly. But I think at the second part of my career, where I get into more managerial and leadership positions, it became a little bit more obvious to me differences, right? And also how generally there's good gender representation in most of the team, but at the leadership level, I think relatively less. Yeah.
Right. So what experience was that at the leadership level? Did you feel lonely that you're one of the few women up there?
I think I feel different. I think there sometimes can be a difference in the communication style, the way that you work. I don't think it's necessarily better or worse,
Right.
but when you're the first person, that is different. And I think that always takes some adjustment. You need to make some adjustment, and everybody else around you have to make some adjustment, which is why the importance of role models, right? So once you see examples of people who are different, then they help to form a new norm.
Right.
Yep.
But what if the organization's not ready to make those changes? Were there cases where you tried to push for change, and were they receptive or not?
I do think that definitely there is a lot more awareness today of the need for diversity. And there are many dimensions to diversity. Gender is just one of them. But it's certainly one that I think a lot of companies have tried to address more directly. And one of the common ways that I've seen them do that is to set up a women's chapter. Or leadership council for women and various such types of schemes. And it is not to say that I don't think such schemes are good, but I think it is important to understand that it is not enough.
Sometimes I feel like every organization has a women's chapter, and every Women's Day, they roll out these forums, these lean-in things. I'm not sure actually what happens after that. I think raising awareness is great. But is it just lip service? Does anything change on an organizational level? I think that's more important.
Well, with some of the organizations I've been part of, it really takes a community leader to, I would say, set an example. We call it in the friend circle the social calendar, right? So if you have someone who constantly engages and set up meetings and act and behave a certain way and force you to join in, then you feel obliged to do that. And we have a group of female entrepreneurs and females in tech and quite a number of female organizations. It takes one or two, and then it just goes viral. But if that person starts to move away, and we're seeing a lot of migration right now during COVID, we're losing some of those momentum.
Right. Those champions,
Those
right?
champions,
Yeah.
exactly.
It needs to start from the top as well, right? Whether it's a man or a woman heading it, someone who actually believes in it. So, I mean, apart from that, on a personal level, what does it take for a woman in tech to thrive in the industry? How do you play the game, or do you have to tailor your approach in any way?
I don't think so. I never really thought of myself as a token or as a gender, or you just take the various charters, objectives, and business goals, and you execute. So the outcome is what measures you. But I think it's now becoming so blatantly obvious in certain circles or certain corporate structures that diversity and inclusion really, truly helps move the needle for the organization, for growth, for different perspectives. And even my own organization, we have less than 100 people, and we have about 40% females. But in Singapore alone, because we try to build that team here, it's really hard to find females in tech, first and foremost. It's even harder to find software engineers or technical roles in that gender. So I don't have the luxury to even hire that, but I want to. And we try to find the best candidates. So I try to fulfill those roles first and foremost based on capabilities first.
Right.
But if we grow to a certain size and you don't have that balanced diversity, and diversity for us and inclusion is way beyond just genders.
Yeah.
It has so many other factors. We are quite diverse already. We have over 25 nationalities
That's
and a
great.
60 people team in Singapore. So
That's amazing.
Yeah. MOM is not liking that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think when you look at the tech sector, when we ask, are there enough women in tech, are there not enough women in tech? I think sometimes it's also in the details, because the tech sector itself is not homogeneous. There are many types of tech talent. In some fields, there are better gender representation than others.
Which
But-
fields would that be?
So I've generally found that in programmer field, in project management, in certain areas, we have women, right? The question is, what is in the hiring and recruiting process of organizations where they are not surfacing enough women candidates, and why is that? And sometimes it could be as simple as recruiters going through their usual networks. They're not casting a wide enough net. They go back to their same old database, and they're not reaching out. They're not finding those other candidates that is beyond their usual network.
Right. And women in tech, how do they fare in terms of seniority of roles and remuneration? Do they end up usually in the lower paying roles or the higher paid roles, or there's no difference?
Oh, definitely lower. I would say still consistently we're making a fraction of what male counterparts are making. But again, it comes from the leadership, how you guide and measure based on the outcome and based on responsibility.
Right.
Just one example from my own team, I would say we're promoting a certain individual who's a female, and she's my only female engineer, who's actually doing an amazing job. And we are practicing more equality in terms of the salary benchmark. And she's younger, less experienced than some of the counterparts and the male counterparts that we hired, but she has now more responsibility. So we raised her salary based on her responsibility and not based on just the seniority per se.
Right.
But so there's a lot of factors at play, and she is quite capable and sometimes even more capable
Right.
than her counterparts. But it matters to some of them to be at par,
Of course.
despite the age gap.
Right. Is the gender pay gap also to do with the skills qualification? Because if fewer women enter tech, or they don't have the required skill sets, then you end up perhaps in the lower paying jobs in tech. Is that a factor?
When I look at gender pay gap, I tend to think of it in terms of the gap for people in similar skills, right? So even in similar skills, you would still get a gender pay gap, and that could be for a variety of reasons. On average, women are paid less than their male counterparts, and the last drawn salary is a very big determinant of your next pay. That already is kind of a systemic disadvantage. But the other one is more often than not, women are less likely to negotiate. So that also puts them in a disadvantage.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think you brought up a particular bugbear of mine, which is the last drawn salary thing. And I think that actually, for all industries, perpetuates the gender pay gap, because if the gender pay gap already exists and potential new employers asking you for your last drawn salary, it's always going to be lower than that of a guy. And that means for perpetuity, you're going to be, as a female worker, paid less than a man. So I think that's actually a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. But I also like to take a step back and sort of explain why I think getting more women into tech jobs is important for women. I mean, apart from the fact that tech is a growing industry of the future in need of more talent, and I'd like to cite some figures from the Ministry of Manpower. In general, women in Singapore earn about 6% less than their male colleagues, which doesn't seem like a big figure, but that figure assumes they're doing the same job, which you mentioned, Winthia, right? And that women have the same opportunities and support systems as men. And we know that's not true. So when you take into account the reality of an uneven playing field, the pay gap is wider. The overall median monthly salary of a woman working full-time is 16.3% less than that of a man. So this higher figure takes into account things like age, education level, and the industry they're in. So I would say, for example, if tech jobs pay more, or there are more tech jobs in the market but not enough women are hired to take these jobs, then women will end up earning less than men, right? What do you guys think?
Maybe not in where I'm coming from, the lens,
right?
Because I think startups are different.
Okay, go on.
If
They're more egalitarian on startups.
Yeah, I spent, a decade or more in the corporate world between startups, and I can see that corporate world has a lot more stability and security, but not necessarily the higher raises. So you might see males moving from different roles or leadership and getting promoted faster than females. So therefore, they are getting the bigger salaries. But if you look at the startups in different sectors, there's more probably gender balance or maybe even salary balance in some of these roles. And so I think the next generation, especially digital natives and cloud native companies, are actually trying to protect or even fix that gap even more so than the corporate world.
I think there's also another part which is about women coming forward and going for the roles, right? But at the same time, I do not want to make it sound like it's all the women's fault for not putting your hands up for these roles. I think in an organization that cares about diversity, that cares that they are tapping the best talent that they have and they are attracting all the talent that they can, that they also need to be looking out and understanding these differences and finding the people and getting them to come forward for the roles. I remember from my own experience, the times when I've had bosses and I had sponsors that pushed me to take on roles that honestly at that point in time I did not think I was qualified. But they believed in me and then they pushed me to get out of my comfort zone and take on those responsibilities. And I have been all the better for it.
Right. And I think the good thing is there's more awareness now. Like I said at the beginning, we have Senior Minister Tharman making this call for more women in tech, and the Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA, has started an initiative called SG Women in Tech, and both of you are listed as role models in tech. So what do you think of initiatives like this?
We have to start somewhere. So I guess we can consider the first batch or benchmark of role models.
Hopefully we can get to a point where there is just maybe 100 people in tech.
Yeah, and not just women,
to have
right?
a separate women's list.
Yeah,
is
I
there
agree.
another list? What's the other list other than the women in tech?
I don't know. Is there any other list?
There's so many lists.
But I think it's a good push because for me personally, I mean, I looked at the 100 women in tech. I looked at that list and I went through, I said, gosh, there are all these amazing, talented, bright women doing these things I never knew existed because I'm such a tech illiterate person in general. So that was encouraging to me. And I felt like if I was a teenager in school, it would be great to see faces that look like me. There are women out there doing interesting, innovative things in tech. So I think I agree that it's a start. It's a good start.
So,
right?
there's something interesting about that list. I had spoken to the organizers, and that's the inaugural list, right? And I believe in the beginning they were a bit concerned whether they will have enough nominations.
Oh.
Will they find 100 women in tech? And turns out they had an overwhelming number of nominations.
That's
and
fantastic.
the struggle is to see who can make it to the list. And I think that's really amazing, right? So there are really a lot of women out there.
Right.
You and I may not know of them. So
Right.
I think the idea of this list, I think, is a great idea
Yeah.
in terms of helping to find women who can represent the diverse fields of tech we are in, and also that the leaders exist today.
Right. So there's visibility, isn't it? Because these women exist, these talented women, but they're not visible for whatever reasons. But the flip side to that, obviously, is what I mentioned earlier, this fear of tokenism, right? So companies are becoming more diverse, becoming more aware of diversity and inclusion across the board, not just in tech. I think there appears to be a more conscious effort now to ensure equal and fair representation of women in hiring practices and policies. But some men and even some women feel uncomfortable with this. There's an aversion to being chosen just to fulfill a quota, for example, right? So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't think there's a right answer for this, unfortunately. You talk to some male folks who have daughters and, some of these male CEOs I speak to, and they find this a little bit insulting.
Right.
Just to fill a gender gap.
Right.
And especially in the more tier 1 organizations. But there is really no right answer for this. You're going to fail at saying something, or leaning left or right. But I believe that to foster some kind of movement, you have to set some kind of standard first. And that standard is to perhaps maybe measure the executives and the leaders as part of their compensation, that at least a certain percentage of females should be in leadership positions or in their business units, leading, managing of sort. And so if they don't have enough females to promote, that means they haven't hired enough females.
Yeah, they haven't looked hard enough.
Yeah, and there are so many qualified talents out there.
Yeah.
And so I think coming to Wynthia's last comment was there are great talents out there. And how do we source them? How do we screen them? We're also unconsciously biased towards each other, towards
Yes.
our own family, towards our own colleagues. So that whole unconscious bias also is at fault in dictating how the outcome
Right.
is.
Wynthia, what do you think? Do you agree?
I think in a lot of organizations, even before they get to the point of saying, I want to hire more women, which I often think is not the issue they need to solve. The first issue they need to solve is to understand that there are many things in their process that introduce a lot of unconscious bias that they may not be aware of. For example, the pronouns they use in their job description, the words they use to describe the role that could signal to candidates that is this place for them or they are not suitable for the role, would they be automatically excluded? So there are already a lot of those things that organizations should pay attention to. And those are easy fixes.
So how do you
right?
mean phrasing a job ad, for example, the kind of language you use?
The words you use
Yeah.
can signal to people whether they belong there or not, whether there is an environment that they're going to work in, the description of the role, right? So that in itself, I think every organization can take a look at. And the other thing is, are you getting from your recruitment process a good diverse pipeline? I remember in one of the organizations I used to work for, I realized at one point I was doing some mass hiring, and I realized after the initial round of hiring, I literally stood up in my office and I looked around and I realized that, oh my God, I have hired only men. What happened? And then what I did was I sat down with the recruiting agencies and I had a very simple request, and I said, bring forward more women candidates to all the hiring managers to interview. All I want to see a more diverse pipeline of candidates that was completely up to the hiring manager who they want to hire. But I just want them to be presented with more diverse candidates. And I think that alone helped to significantly increase the number of women we ended up hiring in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I come to this dichotomy, right? So the quotas, and you consider women that may have not been visible before. But is there a fear now when we talk about quotas and affirmative action and stuff like that? For a woman who's, let's say, hired for a top position, would she feel insecure? And would she say, like, well, I don't want people to think that they hired me just to fulfill a quota? Is that a real fear or is that a false fear? It's a tough one, right? And I say this because I have met many, and not just women in tech, but a lot of women in senior positions who are afraid to champion, let's say, what might be seen as a specifically women's cause or a gender pay gap discussion or something. And I understand the fear being that, I don't want the whole world to think that I was just a diversity hire, that I didn't get here on my own merits, right? My own personal take on that is I feel that's a shame because I feel, why should you feel so insecure? If you're in that position, prove to the world that you deserve that position. How you got there shouldn't matter anymore. I mean, but that's just my take.
I would boast and take that as a compliment.
Exactly.
Hell yeah, I got promoted, I got this job or gig, and I should literally promote it and just shout about it in the community. And rather feeling inferior and doubt yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's another issue that we have to overcome as
women. And women tend to have this imposter syndrome as well. We kind of feel insecure about ourselves all the time. I don't know.
I
Maybe
don't.
both of you don't.
No, I don't.
You're super women.
No, I just feel who was it? Socrates or Plato said, you are what you think.
Right.
Right. And so if you think I'm not worthy, I'm inferior, I'm not, you're going to be that person.
Yeah.
But if you say that I'm worthy and I have great talent and I can succeed, it's the mindset.
Right.
It's really the mindset.
Right.
On the imposter syndrome, I think there are a few ways to look at it. I certainly, throughout my career, I think I've experienced different levels of that. And that, I think, in some ways, naturally comes when you move on to a new role, a role of greater responsibility, and then you're a little bit out of comfort zone, which I think is a good thing to keep doing in your career. And then you start to wonder, am I able to do this job? Maybe I'm not qualified. So I think for some women, that inner critic is a very, very loud voice.
Which prevents them from pushing themselves forward as well, right? For certain positions, which you mentioned earlier, right, Winthia?
Yes. And the inner critic is about tuning your inner critic, right? So the inner critic can be a very good voice for self-reflection, which is important. But don't let it overwhelm you and paralyze you from action.
Right.
Actually, I feel that who you hang around, who you surround yourself with as well can actually change your mindset as well. As the higher level that you go up, you tend to be with a lot more higher level, like-minded colleagues or peers in the community. I'm part of the Entrepreneur Network, YPOers, and all these other networks. No one actually feels inferior. So they only really promote each other. They prop up each other's courage and mindset, and they really motivate each other. And so I think your circle also is the detriment if you only hang around with people who are super negative and only want to see you fail. And so there are those communities that people belong to, and just walk away. Just literally purge the negativity out of your life.
Okay, that's great. That's a great tip. I just want to pull back a bit now and go beyond just women in tech and talk a little bit about the women's review that the government is undergoing right now and this eventual white paper that's going to be tabled. What is your take on this women's review?
When I first read about it, my first thought is long overdue. And then my second thought is, oh my God, it's long overdue, you know? And especially in a place like Singapore, where most people would think that women have done well as a segment in society by all of the metrics that you would measure a society, whether it is mortality rate, women's health, women's income compared to other countries. And yet, I think the interesting thing about what the Singapore government actually highlighted was that they wanted to tackle the fundamental mentalities that people have about gender.
Attitudes.
That's right.
What do you think will be the easiest thing to change about attitudes and the hardest?
That's hard to say. Family, society, I think we can all play a part. I mean, look at the different publishings. When they really portray a woman, it's in their bikinis, about cosmetics, it's about looks. Why not put a woman in front of a cover and talk about her capabilities, about her talent, about what she can achieve? And so I think it's starting to feel this way where certain organizations are pivoting that way. But still, the mass market is selling sex and luxury and different types of brands that belittle women or maybe make different light of women rather than the brains. They sell everything else but the brains.
So maybe advertising standards, yeah, or media standards when it comes to depicting women, perhaps. That could be something radical to consider.
Well, since this
But sex sells. Brain doesn't sell. Sorry. That's where the advertisers come in and say, we're not going to sell this product by talking about brains and IQ.
Well, since this effort is going to accumulate in a white paper, and white paper ultimately influences policy, I think what the Singapore government can do is perhaps lead by example. Earlier, we were talking about gender job descriptions. The government itself can go through its own review, right, to see are they themselves meeting the standards that they hope to set for the industry and for the rest of the country? Are there policies where we may have put on a gender lens when we don't need to? Say, for example, even something like maternity leave. If instead of maternity leave, it is parental leave, right? So if there are companies that think that maternity leave is a drag on their business costs, then when the concept is parental leave, really it is much harder to discriminate against parents, overall men and women, than to discriminate against motherhood, which is what maternity is about.
Right.
The net positive effects can be multifold, right? So first, we remove unnecessarily gendered language from our policy. And second, we focus on parenthood instead of motherhood. And we also remove the assumption here that taking care of children is fundamentally women's responsibility versus parents' responsibility.
Right. Which is an interesting point because you need to get the men involved in this as well, right? Gender equality is not just a women's issue. I mean, if the men don't buy into it, then there's going to be an issue there as well.
I can say that my company, most childcare leaves are actually applied by men.
Oh, fantastic.
So, I've never seen so many annual leaves or childcare leave applications, but these are mostly men going home, staying home.
That's great.
When their wives have to attend to other tasks or responsibilities, and they bear their responsibility, which is great.
But that's an interesting point, right? And I think Winthia, you mentioned this to me earlier, the story about Melinda Gates and how at one point they were thinking about sending their daughter to a school, and the ideal school was quite far away, required quite a big drive, and she was thinking, nah, not a good idea because it's too much of a drive. And she never thought about asking her husband, Bill Gates, because she assumed he would be busy, right?
Yeah, and in the end, they worked out an arrangement where he drives the kids to school some of the days, right? And I think that's a great example of, well, first, even somebody like Melinda Gates can end up with a presumption that it is her responsibility to take care of this versus co-parenting.
Right.
And finding an arrangement that works for both of them as a couple.
Right. Yeah, and the good thing is that once he started sending the kids to school, then more men started sending their kids to school because their wives were telling the husbands, like, hey, if Bill Gates can do it, so can you.
Yes.
So that started a whole trend among men, which is brilliant. I think we need more of that, don't we?
Yes, the male role models too, right?
Yeah, the male role models. But, that's the interesting thing, right? We're talking about more women in tech and more women in science. But should we talk about men taking on roles in other fields as well, like getting more boys in arts, for example, or in nursing? Right, fields which traditionally have more women in them. Does the movement have to be two-way to be meaningful?
It's a very good question you're asking because gender equality is not just about the women. It is really about removing gendered assumptions about roles that people can play in society, and it frees up both women and men from those traditional assumptions of what they should be doing, what they can be doing.
Yeah. And Anna, I think you had a very interesting story about when you were back in working in the Bay Area, or was it? Yeah, it was in the Bay Area. You were applying for a job in a Japanese firm?
No, it was a startup. And my Japanese boss, he actually denied my raise or said other people deserve it better because they have a mortgage and they're married and have kids. I was single, I didn't have a mortgage, and I was in my 20s. And so he felt that the raise, despite my overachievement, he did not feel that I deserved it. So that was definitely one of those experiences that was uncalled for.
That's a huge mindset that needs to change, right? And hopefully that's going to happen. And hopefully that's not too frequent now, attitudes like that. Okay, so I guess I just want to wrap up by asking, what can we women do to make a difference, and what you will be doing to make a difference in 2021 when it comes to gender equality?
There are a few things I would say from my point of view and from my own experience as well. I never take a no for an answer. I think I shared the story with you. If I didn't really persevere, I would not have gotten where I am. It's because I didn't take no for an answer. Don't be afraid to boast and to be proud of your achievements. I think some females out there are very shy and they feel inferior. Just be very proud of your achievements. Every little win counts. And I think we're not used to boasting, especially Asians. We're told not to stand up there and shout as loud as we can. Just be quiet, be ladylike, you know.
Yep.
While the men are shouting and you know, getting all the accolades and promotions. And it's nice to actually recognize yourself and appreciate yourself. The other is literally network and surround yourself with super positive people who actually want to see you succeed rather than the opposite, because I think we have these unconscious networks where we are constantly dealing with people who are actually negative and pulling us down because they themselves don't like to see people succeed. And if you have those types of friends, then you're going to take one step forward, two steps back, and they're constantly going to pull you away from that entire ecosystem.
I definitely agree with Anna's points, especially the one about what I like to call reaching out to the quiet ones. The ones who are not doing a good job of advocating for themselves. It doesn't only happen with women, but I see it more often among women in the workforce. When you talk to them about their achievements, what they've done, they spend 5 to 10 minutes saying how it's everybody else that did that and not them, right? And sometimes you get the complete opposite conversation when you speak to some of the male candidates, right? That really doesn't help themselves. And it's about achieving a right balance, right? Learn how to advocate for yourself, learn how to talk about what you have done, and also when you receive a compliment, learn how to say thank you. As opposed to trying to give it all away.
Right.
So I always try to look out and advocate for the quiet ones. In terms of what I think I can do, I think I'm lucky to have the career that I've had, and I am currently in a position where I'm hiring and growing teams, and in many ways I have responsibility to help grow other people's careers. And so all the things that I may have experienced and observed in the past, I try to put that into practice.
Right. That's brilliant. So I'll tell you what IPS is doing in this new year. We're going to have a women's forum in May. So we're going to be discussing a lot of these issues. And next SR Nathan Fellow is going to be Karina Lim, who's the Executive Director of AWARE. So hopefully we'll keep the conversation going as well when it comes to women's issues and gender equality. So that's a wrap, folks. I'd like to thank you, Anna and Winthia, for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thank you. This is the last episode of On Diversity. The series was produced by the Public Affairs Department of the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. I'd like to thank all of you for keeping me company the last few months. I hope you'll continue having conversations on diversity and that you'll always remember to keep your body healthy and your mind open. This is Ong So Chin, signing off.